Interrupt you for a moment, Ms. Bodiford, to read to you. We have a graphic of the Chief Justice William Rehnquist's decision. He wrote for the majority on the Supreme Court, and he said, "The Boy Scouts assert that homosexual conduct is inconsistent with the values embodied in the Scout Oath and Law. James Dale's presence," who was the person from New Jersey who filed the original New Jersey case, "James Dale's presence in the Boy Scouts would force the organization to send a message that the Boy Scouts accepts homosexual conduct as a legitimate form of behavior." Let me ask you, Ms. Sormesto, what is wrong with being a homosexual leader in the Boy Scouts?
Well, first of all, the Boy Scouts is not a place where sexuality is manifested or acted on, and that type of sexuality has been recognized by medical and scientists throughout the history of mankind as being aberrant, as being abnormal.
Before we continue, we have to make clear, you're not here representing the Boy Scouts Association of America. You're here on your own. Okay.
So homosexuality in almost every single society of the world is seen as something which is sick, pathological.
Can I jump right in here? My understanding here is
But not only that, it's something that a person embraces willingly, because you could have a sickness where you embrace unwillingly, but it's something that you embrace willingly. Now, what I don't understand is how a person can say that the Boy Scouts is a good organization, as the lady just said, and then go on and say, yeah, but this is wrong. Well, if it's a good organization, what it teaches children, what it teaches young boys is good, and it's something that it builds character. Homosexual conduct is incompatible with the values and the principles of the Boy Scouts of America, which, by the way, is an organization chartered by the United States Congress.
May I
now,
just jump in?
if people who want homosexuals as Scout leaders, what they should do is start their own organization, and let's see how many parents turn their children over to them.
We need to differentiate between the issue of conduct and the Boy Scouts. We're not talking about conduct here. The Supreme Court decision is what it is. However, there was never an issue that the Scoutmaster Dale had participated in or any kind of untoward conduct at all. In fact, he had an exemplary record. And so conduct isn't the issue. I think we're all in agreement. There is no one that is saying that that any kind of improper conduct should be condoned within the Scouts. And I just want to address briefly the issue of whether the Scouts are a good organization, and vis-a-vis this issue. The fact that what I think it's very clear that the Scout leaders have taken this organization down the wrong path, and hopefully by the pressure brought to bear on it by fair-minded groups across the country, that they will in time see that they need to change their policy.
Let me get Wingate in here.
This is coming down to an issue of funding. This is not whether the Boy Scouts are right or wrong. It's a political issue, and it's interesting that it's playing out in Fort Lauderdale and Wilton Manors, who are two Broward County cities with substantial homosexual communities that are part and parcel of civic and political life, as well as Broward County. So you express your community values through your funding. Those are political decisions. And that's what we're looking at here, not whether the Supreme Court has said it's all right for Boy Scouts to do what they do, because they have decided that Boy Scouts have an expressive right of free speech. And they've said that those decisions should be made by that group.
Organization.
But we're really looking at what should happen in the city commissions and the county commission in terms of spending public dollars on organizations that are not complying with the Broward County human rights Act. And that's the only issue here.
Yeah, but there's a lot of precedent for the proposition that a government cannot deny a benefit to a private entity in order to punish them for exercising constitutionally protected rights.
Well, there's also a lot of precedent
but I think the local, let me finish. I think the problem is local government should not be in the position of funding private groups, period. I don't think local government should be deciding we're going to give a little money to this charity which we like, and we're going to deny this charity that we don't like, because the next thing you know, they're going to start enforcing values and standards and start placing restrictions on those groups whose positions they may approve or disapprove of. And I think it's a wrong thing. If you want to fund the Boy Scouts, go ahead and give them money. I don't think taxpayer money should go to the Boy Scouts under any circumstances. And I think I was shocked to find out there are so many charitable organizations that go hat in hand to public entities and help themselves to my tax dollars.
They are serving a public benefit.
Let the public give them the money directly, not through the subterfuge of going to elected entities.
They serve though they run summer camps, they run after-school programs that are not troops.
The Boy Scouts are enmeshed in government entities throughout the United States. In New Jersey alone, the Boy Scouts are sponsored or owned outright as franchises by over 600 New Jersey public organizations, either cities, counties, fire departments, police departments, public schools. These are the very organizations that are now withdrawing their support from the Boy Scouts. Why? Because the Boy Scouts can be private or the Boy Scouts can be public. If the Boy Scouts are going to be public, then they don't have a right to that funding. They can't have it both ways. And for them to be funded by public organizations is to unfairly put the government premature and sanction onto that kind of discrimination. And let me just say that the discrimination that the Boy Scouts is perpetrating on the gay youth in this country is causing untold damage. Gay boys are, I just want to say, are particularly vulnerable to self-esteem problems, and they, of all boys, perhaps need most what the Boy Scouts have to offer. And for them to have to face the fact, in the public schools, they have Boy Scout troops. Imagine the teachers
but again,
offering,
we're not talking about the
what boys want to join the Boy Scouts? And 5 boys raise their hand, and the teacher says, "Oh, not you, Johnny. You're gay. You can't be a Boy Scout."
Yeah, but you're relitigating the Supreme Court case.
No,
not
at all. Not at all. I am not. You're misunderstanding. The Supreme Court case said that as a private organization, they had the right to discriminate. They did not say they have the right to receive public funding.
Okay, let me get Mr. Armesto in here.
Since the Scouts were founded, they have been true and consistent to the values and principles which they started out with. The Scouts have never changed, and because they have refused to change, and because they have committed themselves to standing firm on their values and their principles, is the reason why this discussion came up.
But
so they've been bigots for 100 years.
That isn't even the truth.
But the fact is that under the sexual orientation ordinance, there are many exceptions, and among those exemptions are all church-related organizations and churches.
Boy Scouts are not religious organizations.
I didn't say that they were. I didn't say that they were. But I'm saying that as it stands now, government is funding many programs run by institutions and organizations which are legally entitled and legally authorized to discriminate.
Traditionally religious organizations are granted an exemption.
This is nothing new. The fact that we're going to have another organization that is carrying out a public purpose, that is doing a service to our community and our society, and is receiving government assistance, does not obviate the fact that other organizations may or may not be forced to abide by the anti-discrimination ordinance.
Let me ask you a question, Ms. Bodiford. Would you agree with Ed Wasserman's assertion that government should not be involved in providing any funding for any private organization, be it Boy Scouts?
No, I don't agree with that. I think that I think that the money that would otherwise go to the Boy Scouts, until the Boy Scout leadership either has changed or has been educated that they need to stop their discriminatory practices, we should fund the 4-H clubs, the Boys and Girls clubs, the Campfire Girls, the Campfire Boys. These are all organizations that provide invaluable services to youth and do not find it necessary to discriminate. And I just want to touch briefly on the history of the Boy Scouts. The fact is that when Scoutmaster Dale was thrown out of the Boy Scouts in 1990, there was no articulated policy in the Boy Scouts to discriminate against homosexuals. No exclusionary.
Is there today?
Yes, there is. After Scoutmaster Dale filed suit to seek reinstatement to the Scouts in 1991, the Boy Scouts set forth a policy that articulated this exclusionary point of view or policy that they had, and then finding that that wasn't sufficient for the litigation in 93, more clearly articulated their policy.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. Many thanks to Attorney Robin Bodiford and Eladio Jose Ernesto of the Democratic League of Dade County. Moving on to our election coverage, this week it was the Democrats' turn to shine under the national spotlight. With the Democratic and Republican national conventions over, we now look at each party's message and what could be at stake for South Florida in this presidential race. With us now is Kevin Hill, Associate Professor of Political Science at Florida International University. Dr. Hill teaches comparative politics and has co-authored the book Cyber Politics, Citizen Activism in the Age of the Internet. And also with us is Juliet Gainsborough, Assistant Professor of Political Science at the University of Miami. Dr. Gainsborough is author of the forthcoming book, Fenced Off, the Suburbanization of American Politics. Thank you both for joining us. Let me ask you, Dr. Gainsborough, now that the Democratic Convention has wrapped up, was it a successful convention? Is the Democratic Party unified?
I don't think they're as unified as they really needed to be. I think that the message that was presented over the course of the past few days was nowhere near as coherent as the message that was presented at the Republican convention. I think that was inevitable given the position that they're in, that they're looking at, they're a party that's had the presidency already for 8 years. When you look at the Republicans, they're desperate to win the presidency. That's much easier to unify the party and present a coherent single message in that situation.
But Dr. Hill, let me ask you, there was a disappointment in the state of Florida that Senator Bob Graham was not the vice presidential candidate. Right. Is that going to have any effect in the state of Florida?
I think people were more disappointed because, well, of course, a lot of people want to see Bob Graham on the ticket, you know, native son and everything. But I think a lot of Democrats were disappointed because they saw that as a signal that the Democratic Party wasn't going to seriously contest Florida this year like it did in 1992 and 1996. And there's a lot of good reason why they shouldn't waste a lot of money in Florida, because it looks like a Bush state at this point, although anything can happen. But I'm sure there was disappointment, but it was more of a, well, this means that they're not going to come after the 25 electoral votes in Florida this year.
How close is this race going to be? The pundits tend to say that it's going to be, it's going to be down to the wire. Would you both agree that this is the case?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a very close election, and I think, right until the end, I think the debates are going to be important and very interesting.
What are the different issues between both parties right now, Dr. Gainsborough?
In terms
they seem to be addressing the same issues. It's the formula that's different. Would you agree?
Yeah, and I think it's that they're different around the margins on the issues. So they both agree that education's important, and then Bush is going to say that therefore we need to think about vouchers, and Gore is going to say no, we need to think about increased funding for public schools. They both agree that Social Security is important, but again, they're going to disagree on exactly what it takes to preserve Social Security and what's going to secure Social Security for future generations.
Ed Wasserman, tax cuts are also mentioned in both parties. How likely are we going to see, how important are tax cuts going to be in winning over the state of Florida, if at all?
Well, I think that tax cuts are a symbolic issue as well as a material one, and I think that what you saw in the Gore speech the other night was the idea that tax cuts are an exemplar of the way that the GOP wants to reward their fat cat friends, and we in the Democratic Party want to make sure there's fairness and the people who actually need to help get it. I think it's going to be a very interesting election. I think that the gap between the two candidates has been very, very overblown. It's based on polling that takes place at a time when the public has very little idea who these people are, and they know that George W. seems like an affable guy, and they know that Gore seems like a remote, somewhat distant and austere figure. But I think that Gore has tremendous strengths coming into this. He has structural advantages in that he's associated with an incumbency that's presided over unprecedented prosperity, lower crime, lower teenage pregnancy, just every index you want to see of what's going on in the society is on the up. And I think that GW, on the other hand, has not had an opportunity to accumulate the kind of political IOUs that you need at the currency of politics. He can't come to Florida and say, look the way I fought for Social Security, look the way I fought for Medicare funding.